Hi everyone, this is Guy at Chicory Sticks, and I'm going to make a short video just giving an overview of my Lova pattern and showing you examples of the different types of yarn you can use to create different projects with different needle sizes. And then I will also demonstrate how to join the two ends of the bands together to create a headband. So in the pattern, I wrote two different ways you can overlap the two ends and sew them together using the ends of the yarn. And you can also start and end with a provisional cast on and bind off, and then you can graft the two ends together. So I will demonstrate both of those, and then I will also demonstrate a third way with a 3 needle bind off in case you would like to use that one instead. So just a brief overview of the different projects you can make with Lova. The project I make the most are headbands for babies and kids. And usually I use a fingering weight yarn. So this one is a Mardi Gras headband in purple, green, and gold. This is using a fingering weight 100% wool yarn. This one up here is also a fingering weight 100% wool yarn. And here I'm going to overlap the two ends and put that decorative button there to create a baby headband. So that's what it looks like if you use a fingering weight wool. If you want to go up in size, this one is a bulky weight, chunky yarn. So this one I used size 10.5 needles, which is 6.5 millimeters, and this will create more of an ear warmer, kind of a chunky ear warmer for me or for a kid. If you want to use fuzzy yarn, this is an alpaca blend, and these two headbands are actually knit with the exact same yarn, different colorway. But for this one, I used a single strand of yarn, and this yarn was labeled as a DK weight. So I used size 6 needles, which is 4 millimeter. So this one is just a single strand. It makes kind of a thin headband for my daughter. This one is the same yarn, but I held 2 strands together, and I use size 10.5 needles again, so 6.5 millimeters to create more of a bulky weight. And again, that makes more of like a thick headband or an ear warmer. If you want to use linen or cotton yarn or plant yarn that you have on hand, you can create really nice belts or ribbons. There isn't much stretch in these yarns, so it's better suited to a belt than it is a headband. But this one is 100% linen yarn in a fingering weight. So I actually used a size 3 needle for this one, 3.25 millimeters. This one was labeled as a DK weight yarn, so I used size 6 needles, 4 millimeters. And this leads to an important point about blocking. So when you're done knitting your piece, you're going to want to soak it in water. And for a headband, you will want to block it open widthwise. You're going to pull it open widthwise, pin it so it opens the lace this way, but you do not want to block it lengthwise. And that's because you want to retain the stretch here so that it squeezes on to the person's head. If you block it lengthwise to open up the lace, you risk having it just completely stretched out and it'll slip off someone's head. So I only block this way, and for these little headbands, I usually try to block it to about 1 inch wide, and then I let the length be however it is. So when it's just sitting in a box, it doesn't look that pretty because it's kind of scrunched up, but once it's on someone's head, that's when it really opens up and you can see the lace. In contrast, if you're going to use something like linen or cotton for a belt, I do block aggressively in all directions. So for these, I blocked as far as I could widthwise, and I blocked as far as I could lengthwise. And that's how you get this lace that's really opened up and pretty. So that's that. So I designed this pattern to use up yarn that you already have in your stash. A lot of the projects I've been making only take about 6 grams of yarn, which is practically nothing. Maybe 25 yards for the smaller headbands. So I can't give too much guidance about what yarn to use with what needles and how many repeats to do, because it's really going to depend exactly on what you have on hand, the exact, fiber composition of your yarn and the needle size you use, and if you knit loosely or tightly, that's all going to affect the final band that you make. So you're just going to have to experiment and try different needles with different yarn, different beads. And if it doesn't look good, just rip it out, try again. That's what's so nice about this pattern. It's so small and so quick. You can experiment and use up yarn that you already have. Okay, so now we get to the part where I'm going to demonstrate how I close the band into a loop to create a headband. So the first method I described in the pattern is to overlap the two ends together, and then you'll secure that with the ends of the yarn. If you would like to do that method, you're going to start with the most basic type of cast on, the half hitch cast on. So I'm sure you're familiar with it. You just do the backwards loop. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then my tip is to not count this first stitch with the slip knot. So we'll do one more. So now I have 7 stitches plus that first stitch with the slip knot. And when you go to knit your first row, you're just going to let that one slip off, and then you won't have that bump there. So you'll just have these 7. So that's how you're going to cast on if you're going to do the overlap closure. And if you use that cast on, you get a really nice kind of rounded end at the bottom. So that's also, I'll show you when I made these. That's the cast on method I used. And so you get that nice lace rounded edge. When it comes time to bind off, you can just do whatever kind of basic bind off you want. It doesn't really matter because it's going to be hidden. And in the pattern, I said that you should overlap the first 4 repeats on top of the last 4 repeats. This is the smallest size. This is going to be a headband for a baby. So I'm actually only going to do 3 because I think if I do 4, it's going to be a little too much. So I'm going to count 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, 3, and just overlap those like so. And then I find my ends of yarn right here and put that onto a tapestry needle. And here there's no real particular way you need to do this, just as long as your stitches look tidy and can't really be seen. I like to go right through the sides here. So like that. I found that kind of hides and hides your stitches and keeps you precise as you go down the edge. So like that. And so you can see it just holds the two layers together. So I'll continue with that and you can watch. So that just kind of secured it around these two sides. So you can see, just kind of holds them in place. And then I take this, the other end that was attached to the cast on edge, and then for this one, I like to just, I put it to the back, oops, like so. And then I like to kind of attach that little point. So I come up through the back, and then there's the point right there. I just try to kind of catch the middle part of that point and just secure it down so it doesn't flap up. So there we go. So you have that overlap section. It's very noticeable, but it creates a really nice spot to put a decorative button. So these buttons just have the little loop on the back, and I would take my end of yarn and just secure the button right there on the back, and that creates a nice headband. So the next way that you can secure the ends together is to graft them. So I'll show you the grafting real quick, and then I'll also show you how you can use a 3 needle bind off if you're more comfortable with that. Okay, the second method I mentioned in the pattern is to graft the 2 ends together. So I believe this one I grafted. It's not a completely perfect join. You as the knitter will be able to tell where you join the 2 ends together, but it's still pretty good. It's less noticeable than the overlap method. So if you would like to graft the 2 ends together, you will need to start with a provisional cast on at your cast on end and a provisional cast off. So here I've done a real provisional cast off with a crochet hook, the crochet chain provisional cast on. If you are feeling lazy, like I do most of the time, I don't even do a real provisional cast on. Since it's only 7 stitches, I will cast on an extra row, and then when it comes time to graft them, I just unpick my cast on row. So that's another option if you don't want to bother with a crochet chain provisional cast on. But if you'd like to see what that looks like, just as a review, this is what I would do. I would make my slip knot. There we go. And then you could use a crochet hook. That makes it a lot easier. Again, since it's only 7 stitches, if you don't want to find your crochet hook, you can just put your other knitting needle through. So both needles are through that loop. And then I wrap the yarn around both needles. I catch it on that top one, and I use the top one to pull it through. And then I do the exact same thing. I go all the way around and pull that stitch through. And so let me do one more. Go all the way around and pull the stitch through that loop. And so you can see, if I turn this over, those are your provisional stitches, and it creates a little crochet chain that you can undo quickly when it comes time. So just showing you that you can do a quick provisional cast on without a crochet hook. There we go. So that's what it would look like. And so for this one, my little fingering weight headband, I will undo these provisional cast on and bind off, put them back on the needle, and then I'll show you how I graft them together. Okay, and here's actually an important point that I mentioned in the pattern too. If you're going to do the grafting method, you'll notice that when you undo your provisional cast on, you will only have 6 stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, because what you actually just put on your needle are not the stitches you started with, they're the little connections between the stitches. So you cast on 7 stitches and there's 6 little connections between those stitches, if that makes sense. So you only have 6 stitches on your cast on end. You're going to need 7 so that they match up and line up properly with the bind off. So in order to do that, you want to pick up one more stitch right in the middle. So I'm going to take my second needle, just to orient you. This is how you started. This is the cast on edge. Now I'm flipping it around. And I'm going to put these 3 on another needle. So now I have 3 on one needle, 3 on another needle. The middle stitch will be right between these 2. And all I'm going to do is take the tip of my needle and pull this. This is the running thread. I'm going to pull the running thread up and make one more stitch, and then move them all back to either of the needles, just so they're all on one needle. There we go. So now I have 7 stitches on my cast on, and I'm ready to graft that. And it is important that you make the missing stitch from the very middle. I've tried it from other places and the grafting doesn't line up if you make it from a different position. So let me put my bind off edge on the needle and then I will show the grafting. Okay, so now I have my bind off edge back on the needle. In order to make sure your stitches are in the right position, the right leg is going to be coming over the front of the needle. So if you kind of splay your stitches out, they're coming over the top this way. The right leg of the stitch is over the top. Okay, so to graft, you're going to take both your ends, which are now each on their own needle, and you're going to hold them together. So personally, I take my bind off end of yarn. I'm going to put that on my tapestry needle. Like so. Okay, now I am ready to graft. So I line them up together. And the first thing I'm going to do with my bind off end of yarn is I'm going to insert the needle as if I am purling this front stitch. So the first stitch on my front needle, which is the bind off edge, I'm going to put the tapestry needle through like I'm purling. And this is just to prepare that stitch. Nothing else is happening. I put it like that. Then I'm going to take the yarn around between the 2 needles and I'm going to put this one through as if I'm knitting it. But again, I'm looking at the back side. So I'm looking at the wrong side of the cast on edge. So I'm going to take my needle and I'm going to prepare this first stitch by going through it as if I were knitting it. And I pull the yarn through and I'm going to pull these together now. So the first stitch I'm going to pull off the needle now is I'm going to take the yarn and go back to the front. So first needle, I'm going to go as if I'm knitting. I'm going to go through it like that. I'm going to pull this off and I'm going to pull that a little bit snug. Now I'm going to need to prepare this next stitch on the front needle. So to prepare the stitch, I'm going through purlwise, like so. Now I'm ready to take the first stitch on the back needle off, which means I'm going to purl it. I'm going to purl it like that. And now it can come off. And pull it a little bit snug. And then I need to prepare the back stitch, prepare the back needle, which means I'm going to place this knitwise. Like so. Now I can come back to the front. I'm going to put the yarn through knitwise through the front needle and I can pull that stitch off. I'm going to prepare the front needle, which means going through purlwise. And I can take the stitch off the back needle, which means going purlwise through the back needle. I'm going to take that stitch off. Now I need to prepare the next stitch on the back needle, which means going through knitwise. Now I'm ready for the front needle again. Go through knitwise. and off. I'm going to prepare the front needle by doing purlwise. And I can do purlwise on the back and take it off. There we go. So the mantra to remember with this is knit. So here I'm knitting the back. So knit, knit the front, knit the front, off. Then you purl, purl, off. So knit, knit, off, purl, purl, off. So here we go again. Knit the back, knit the front, off. Purl the front, purl the back, off. Knit the back, knit the front, off. Purl the front, purl the back, and off. Okay, you got to the last 2 stitches, and here you just kind of do your best. We're going to knit the front stitch off because it's already been prepared. And then here, the back stitch, we're just gonna purl it. And you'll notice these last stitches get a little stretched out, but you can just kind of sew them back in place. So the grafting isn't, as I said, completely perfect. You as the knitter will notice the little flaws, but I think the recipient will be quite happy. There's no big overlap section. So yeah, here you can see that those last stitches really stretch out, and so you just kind of need to finesse the ends, and then when you weave in the ends in the back, you can kind of stretch it out properly like that. So that's how you do the grafting. I will show also really quick how you can use a 3 needle bind off. It's kind of in between the overlap and the grafting in terms of difficulty. It's kind of a little bit easier way, and you might prefer to do it that way. So I have another one ready to go right here. Let me get the ends onto my needles, and I will show you how I do a 3 needle bind off with this pattern. Okay, so now I have my bind off edge back on a needle. There are 7 stitches. And here's my cast on edge back on a needle. There are 6 stitches. So for the 3 needle bind off, you will also need to create that middle stitch back on here. So again, on the cast on edge, you're gonna just put 3 stitches on one needle, 3 stitches on another needle, and you're gonna pull a new stitch up out of the running thread right there in the middle. So now you have 7 stitches on your cast on edge to match the 7 stitches on your bind off edge. Okay, and now we're ready for the 3 needle bind off. So let me make sure I have a 3rd needle. Okay, my 3rd needle is going to be this red one. Different size, but it still works. So for the 3 needle bind off, you are actually going to put the 2 right sides together, so you have the wrong sides facing out. And let's see, it doesn't really matter if you use the bind off edge or the cast on edge, the tail that you're going to knit with. Let's just use the bind off edge. So the right sides are facing each other, the wrong sides are facing out. You are now, this isn't truly a 3 needle bind off. So in a 3 needle bind off, you would knit 2 stitches together, knit another 2 stitches together, and then bind those 2 off. Here we're actually going to do one more row of, we're gonna knit the two together, but not bind off. I'll show you. So here I've taken my third needle and I'm gonna knit the first stitches on both needles together. So I went in knitwise on both. I'm gonna pull the yarn around and bring it through. And now I'm gonna pull both of these stitches off of their original needles. And now I have one live stitch on my third needle. I'm gonna do the same for the next set of stitches. So I'm gonna go through the first needle and the second needle, bring the yarn around, pull it through, and pull these off. So now in a real 3 needle bind off, you would take this loop, pull it over the second loop, and you've bound off a stitch. Here we're just gonna keep going along the headband, and we're gonna get all of our stitches knit together. So I'm just going down the length of this, knitting each one together. And so this is why you need to have the same number of stitches on the cast on edge and on the bind off edge so that they match up. So there we go. Now I have all the stitches knit together on my third needle. So if we look from the right side, you get this little seam, but it's not too noticeable. Now I'm going to turn around, and here is where I'm going to bind off. So I'm going to knit a stitch like that, and same here. Now this is just a normal bind off. So really we could call this a 3 needle bind off in 2 steps. 2-step 3 needle bind off if we want to make up a name for it. So I would say this is the intermediate closure. It's more difficult than the overlap, but it's a little easier and faster than the grafting if you don't like grafting. So just doing a normal bind off of all those stitches. Pull the yarn through, and there you go. So on the back side there's this ridge of the new row, because you did knit a new row on the back, and on the front, not too noticeable. You got this little seam, got a little seam right there, but there you have it. So there's one extra way that you can attach the headband together.